Thank you so much for joining me for this chat, this interview. I'm really excited to hear some of your thoughts on some of the questions that I have, and I did want to kind of approach this a bit differently than maybe some of the other ones that the other interviews that you've been doing recently. I want to really get into the details of the process and things like that, and
Cool.
see what we can uncover. So, welcome and thank you so much for
Jordan,
joining us.
it's lovely to meet you. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real privilege to be here and nice to be talking to you almost on the other side of the world. I mean, I guess
Almost, yeah.
you're quite at the top of the world and I'm almost down at the bottom of the world. So
Exactly, yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I hope that someday I can make my way over there and record
Yeah, come
some
down. Come
real
down.
Middle Earth ambience over there.
Oh, yeah, no, you're welcome anytime.
That would be
There's
awesome.
a wealth of beautiful sonic material waiting to be captured by your microphones.
Perfect, perfect. Well, like I said, I would love to go through this in a kind of nitty-gritty detail kind of way,
Yeah,
but I
great.
thought that something that would be useful to start things
Mhm.
off for people is if you could maybe talk a little bit to what the difference between a composer and a music
Mhm.
editor is, because I feel like
Oh,
a lot of people
yeah.
see what the composer is. It's very
Hmm.
clear what that person
Hmm.
does, but there's kind of sub jobs underneath that or
Yeah.
alongside it that
Hmm.
people might not even be aware that they exist.
Yeah,
So I'd be
sure.
curious if you could talk about
Okay.
that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jordan, I mean, in broad terms, the composer is hired um, to write the music, to deliver the music for the film. Um, the composer is also potentially like a a head of department, and when you're on a film or TV show or a project, especially one like War of the Rohirrim, where there is 2 hours of music to write,
Mhm.
and there are jobs that need to be done to make sure that the material that the composer writes and is um, signed off on by the director or the producer
Mhm.
or both, ideally, um, that those ideas get um, firstly translated into or orchestrated into and again, this depends on the type of score you're doing, but
Yeah,
let's talk about Rohirrim as an example here.
definitely.
So, like a score that sort of utilizes traditional Western European orchestral instrumentation
Mm.
with with also incorporating some traditional Japanese percussion, some Nordic instruments, and some woodwinds that were designed around the late medieval, early Renaissance period. So all of
Awesome.
those are essentially our forces, and
Yeah.
including the choir. So all of these great musicians traditionally uh, like perform the music that the composer writes by reading it off a score. Do I have one? Yeah. Okay. Like this one right here, right? So, uh,
Awesome.
okay. So Stravinsky wrote, what is this? This is the Firebird. He
Nice.
wrote it down. The orchestra reads what he's written and plays it. And this is in broad basic terms, right?
Yeah.
But so if the distance between um, what the composer writes, usually they're writing in a computer or a digital audio workstation,
Mhm.
which is a piece of software which you can enter MIDI information, musical information, performance information into.
Mhm.
In my case, mine is Pro Tools. So while I'm writing, I'm using a combination of samples, which are basically recordings of instruments like violins, woodwind sections, brass, to build like a mock-up
Mm.
um, for the director. So I'm using electronic means to design the music, write the music, compose the music. So that I can present it to a director and say,
What do you
this is
think?
what the music's going to sound like, but when we record it with real instruments, there's going to be more of a human aspect to a lot of these things, and there's going to be imperfections, really, in broad terms, imperfections of like a lot of people playing together in a room, which is what we associate with, like what an orchestra of human beings should sound like.
Exactly.
So in order, basically, on a team to effectively deliver a score, as well as the composer, you have people like, as you say, a music editor. And a music editor's job is basically, it can be quite varied. It can be, ultimately, I like to think of the music editor as responsible for delivering all of the music in the film after the composer has finished writing and recording, and everything has been mixed to the director and the composer's satisfaction. Music editor can come on a film at an early stage and help the editorial department build what we call a temp score. So this is taking music from pre-existing soundtracks or pre-existing album releases and putting together a temporary music soundtrack that the editor and director can carry in their session. And the reasons for doing that can be multitudinal. Partly it can be to inject a non-verbal audio information into the score, which can sort of help bring the tension up or makes things spooky. Or it can also be like just a period where the director and editor are experimenting with what type of music they might want in their soundtrack. And at the worst case scenario, so hang on, in the best case scenario, let's talk about the best case scenario. The best case scenario is they experiment, they play around, and they have a leaping off point to engage with a collaborator, a composer, about what kind of soundtrack they think could work or not for their film. Worst case scenario, it's used as like a safety blanket, in which case the director and editor maybe they're pulling in a lot of music, and it just, because they have music from, say, I don't know, James Newton Howard score playing over their picture, they suddenly feels more professional, feels kind of like a real film. And I think the very worst case scenario is that, plus that music becoming prescriptive, as in we want you to copy exactly what we
get
did
attached to what was there and what they've been listening to.
Exactly. It can be a fine balance, but I do think that the temp score in its best form can be a really effective jumping off point for effective discussion between collaborators. So that's one aspect that a music editor can help put together. The other part of the music editor's job is to be on the recording stage, and to make sure, basically build the sessions that we record into, build the click track, which is like a metronomic guide for the players to play against, take note of which takes of the performances are the ones that the composer or the producer likes, edit those takes together, and basically deliver those to get mixed. The music editor is also a really key, important part of the team, because at some point the composer will probably leave the project to move on to something else. The music editor is left with the music, and they're representing the music on the dub stage, where all of the audio elements come together to form the mix, what will be the mix of the film. In our modern workflow in film, picture editorial right up until the last minute of the dub is commonplace. So what that means is that at a very late stage in the film's post-production period, people can still make significant picture editorial changes. And as a music editor, part of your job is to make sure the music keeps the intent that the composer and the director decided upon when they were.
Doesn't get lost in the
100%.
The changes or just time going by.
Yes, exactly. And conversely as well, like if the intent of the music, the director suddenly changes what intent the music needs to address, then as a music editor, your job is to the best of your ability, address that with the material that you have.
Yeah.
So I put it like rather flippantly, I would have to add that like a music editor is like a midwife in the sense that the director and the composer have done the creative act, and your job is to deliver the music into the world in the intact in the best possible shape and form that's representative of the director's wishes or intent. So that's probably the most rambling overview you will
No, that's
hear.
great. That's really great. And I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into a little
Sure.
pieces here and there. Like you talked about choosing the metronome and choosing the tempo for these sessions.
Yes.
Are you actively deciding then?
Yes.
And the composer is not?
No, as a composer, I'm deciding the tempos. It's usually up to
not the editor.
Music editor. At this stage, I mean, it's not out of the question that they could change it. But as the composer, as you're writing to the film and addressing the director's intent, the composer would usually decide the click settings, the tempo, the meter, etc. I think one example where the music editor might make changes would be if there was a situation where there was a late breaking picture change before you went to the scoring session and an adjustment was needed to take into account a music edit to address the picture edit, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But largely as a composer, the tempo, meter, those are, along with rhythm and harmony and dynamics, I think tempo, meter is another expressive element, expressive force in your toolkit. So yeah, I think the composer generally makes those decisions.
Yeah, and it must be a tricky thing to, like, as a composer, try and describe how you even go about that, because it must so totally be based on feel.
I think so.
It's really kind of what works in the moment. And what I'm interested in is, as a composer, if you had a scene from War of the Rohirrim as an example, would you, how would you actually decide that tempo? Like, are you playing to it, or are you tapping to it, et cetera, right? Like, there's different instruments, I guess, you could use to decide the tempo.
This is a great question, a really, really good question. And I think different composers have different methodology in deciding, and also different contexts in which they make those decisions, depending on, how the director's intent, the speed of the editing cuts, how the camera moves, all those sort of things. Personally, for me, what I try to do is, when I'm watching the sequence down and I start writing, is just play against the picture moving, and then just once I've got the cue in a shape that feels like it's working against the picture, then go back and find the tempo of what I've just played in. I find that the most musical way to do it.
Totally.
But other than that, there are other ways to do things. Of course, if you really wanted to generate a tempo that was like based on the speed of an edit or something like that, and you needed to be sort of like absolutely rock solid precise, you could tap tempo. I have a couple of devices that, in Pro Tools there's a tap tempo option. I have a little device here called can I pull it out? It's just unplugged now. Called a metronome,
Nice.
which if it was plugged in, you'd see it light up. But it's basically one of the things that this does is you can tap it and it'll give you the tempo, the speed that you're tapping at. But this
Have
is
you
also
ever
really
had
effective.
to, as a music editor or as a composer, have you ever had to kind of combat in any way what the tempo was?
Combat?
If you
Yeah.
come up with something different,
Hmm.
but well, you might even have an example where the editor has edited to
Mm.
the
Mm.
temp score's tempo.
Hmm. Yeah, occasionally, yes, I have. Because it's one thing that I mean, there's been occasions where yes, I have had to do that,
Hmm.
and it's I love the fact that when you're working with somebody or you're in a collaboration with somebody, there's that inherent trust and the inherent ongoing collaborative conversation.
Yeah,
So it's sometimes if you really strongly feel that what the temp is maybe not the only way to approach
mm,
uh, a sequence or a part of the score of the film. Yeah, absolutely. There's times where I've I've presented an alternative and
yeah,
not always been given the thumbs up.
yeah, yeah. Makes sense.
One should try if one
Yeah,
feels strongly.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, speaking more of composing, then, let's say that you had a scene from War of the Rohirrim, like it's the
Hmm.
first day. You've got you've
Day
you've
one,
got a
yeah.
scene day one.
Yep. Yep.
Um,
Sit down with my cup of tea. Here we go.
exactly, and then what? You've got your tea, and what's
Hmm.
the next step? Because this is the kind of thing that in interviews that I see with composers a lot of the time, it's kind of, and I don't mean this necessarily in a negative way, but it's a lot of
No.
like kind of fluffy, like, oh,
Yeah.
I talked with the
Yeah.
director about the
Hmm.
character and blah, blah,
Hmm.
blah. And I'm
Hmm.
interested in like, you sat down at your
Yeah.
desk
Yeah.
day one, and then what happened, kind of
Oh,
thing.
there was some weeping and
Exactly.
some serious questions about one's self-worth and
Exactly.
one's ability to do such a job. I
And
mean,
another cup of tea.
in yeah, and then another cup of tea, and then things were great. I hear what you're saying, and in this instance, um, I was very privileged because, as far as the music is concerned, it's not starting in a void. It's not starting with a blank canvas.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thanks to the amazing work of Peter Jackson, Howard Shore, the collaboration that born into the world the amazing Lord of the Rings trilogy and the 13 hours of music that was written
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah.
13 hours of great music. There are tenets and constraints and a language, an architecture that exists already. You're stepping into this world that has, as far as the original trilogy goes, has very clear musical tenets,
Defining
very clear musical
features.
idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's not the case with every film. So really, my first part on day one was really research, which sounds kind of boring, but really is just
Sounds
going
awesome to me.
over. Well, no, it was. I mean, it was great.
I got
But do it every day.
Doug
Check
Adams
it
book right
out!
here.
Nice.
Yeah,
Yeah, that Doug Adams book is fantastic. It's really good. It's
I was
great.
reading through it today.
Oh, it's a fantastic book. He really did a great job on that. And I wish there
Yeah,
were more films that had books like that
totally.
with that amount of detail.
Where's the Star
So,
Wars version of that?
oh, where's the Star Wars version? Absolutely, man, absolutely. I think the it was just really researching. This film Rohirrim deals with largely the Rohirrim culture and
Right.
the environment of Edoras and Helm's Deep, right? So those are identifiable locations, environments, sure, it's earlier than the Lord of the Rings. The culture that inhabits these spaces is familiar to us. It's not quite at the point of decline that we see it in the trilogy. There are neighboring cultures, the Dunlending culture, that we see a little more of in this film. So it's really exploring those tenets about what made this culture, what made this musical language, what it was, what are the defining aspects, as you say, of this musical language, and how within that, how do we take the architecture and then fundamentally serve the film and serve the Kamiyama-san's intent, but also branch out, as this is a sort of a visual medium that is different from the live action trilogy.
Right.
This is a Japanese anime. How do we balance the musical language of, the architecture that Howard Shore and Peter Jackson created? How do we then pay respect to that and build our own musical environment, our own musical kind of statement that respects both the trilogy and Kenji Kamiyama's film,
Right.
and serves primarily his film. So I was going to say that was day one, but that was basically
That was day 1 and 2, isn't it?
day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. So that's the first part, and really just researching.
Yeah.
And then thinking about from there, because at this point, day 1, I don't have the picture. I have the script, and that's day 1, and I read the script. And
Must be a very exciting and
it was a great day.
exciting in the possibilities, but also
Yes.
probably nerve-wracking
Terrifying.
a little bit in the
Jordan, yes, absolutely terrifying. Yeah, that initial surge of excitement and enthusiasm, joined in large part by yes, a huge surge of dread and intimidation. But that was basically day 1, and really just exploring the elements of what made the characters that we're going to spend 2 hours with. What are the characteristics that feel like they could be outlined, colored in with musical language, and what are the characteristics that we feel could provide strong motivation for thematic material. That makes sense.
Right. Yeah. Very cool. And so you've kind of done that research, and then we get to actual writing. And when it comes to the actual writing, again, it's a little bit different, as you say, because you're not fully being like, okay, what are all the instruments I'm going to use?
Yeah,
that's part of it, but
that's part of it. Yeah,
it's, as you said, part of it's already decided kind of for you.
Yes.
So then when it comes to you've decided on the instruments or new instruments that you're going to use, and I'm sure that was kind of a developing thing.
Yes.
As you discover fun new things that you can add.
Yes.
But when it comes time to, okay, we've got the instruments kind of decided, let's sit down and write. Are you, and I kind of asked this a little bit in on the OneRing.net's stream, but are you writing by hand? Are you writing with your piano? Are you writing with a guitar? Are you writing, if this makes sense, in your head first, or are you theoretically writing things? All these kind of, I'm sure the answer is all of them at different stages, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
I think this is a great series of questions, and to a degree, it's all of those things. I have to say, probably 85% of it is me playing on my keyboard controller, and really, and it sort of sounds weird, but just kind of just sort of playing thing. Actually, this is going to sound really really terrible, but I, so something like the overture, which has the headstrong theme, which is really kind of the characteristic of the main character Hera, that I thought was really compelling to sort of write against. People call it the Hera theme, but essentially it's called Headstrong. It was really, that took about a month to write, which, it's not a complex theme at all. It's very simple, but to get to something that was simple and articulate, took a while to find that, and I went down a lot of like wrong turns. But it's a lot of the time was me sitting at my keyboard or a piano or something like that, just playing these ideas, and then just trying again until really I found something that I could put against the what picture I'd been delivered, or the artwork that I'd been delivered, and something that felt true to what I was seeing, and right. to some degree what I was hearing. So a lot of it was me playing and trying to find those things, but me playing in a set of predetermined or predefined, with a series of predefined limitations. Because I was like, okay, working in the Rohirrim culture for Hera, these are the characteristics of the Rohirrim music as we understand it from the original trilogy.
Right.
So let's start with those. Okay, so a lot of minor thirds and a lot of stepwise movement.
Right. Not
too many big leaps. But Hera is a different character from your ordinary, everyday Rohirrim warrior. She's in the Shield Maiden tradition, which links her in lineage with Éowyn later when we get to the trilogy. Mm-hmm. She's headstrong. She's like a maverick. So her musical nature, or her musical language, or the music that sort of speaks of her and her characteristics, needs to do those things. It needs to be maverick. It needs to be sort of a little different from, what we've heard before for the majority of the Rohirrim music. Right. So it needs to serve her character and the cultural context that she's come from. It needs to put her in line with Éowyn, and it also needs to speak to her maverick kind of nature. So it's then you start sort of shifting and going, well, okay, a lot of stepwise, minor thirds, things, melody sort of like leaping to maybe like a major fifth. Ooh, whoa. And I know, wild, right? Crazy. Yeah. Who's ever done that before? And then sort of sort of stepping down inside itself. So there's that theory side of you that's going, okay, these are the tenets of what we have to fix. There's the playing and sort of experimenting around with those shapes. But then ultimately there's the emotional reaction that when you have made the theme and it's up against the picture, that feels true.
Right.
And it's one thing for it to feel true to a certain characteristic of a certain character at a certain moment in the film. But then how does this thematic material, how does it travel across all of these different emotional temperatures that this character sort of tracks through the story?
Yeah.
So it's really like, okay, we've got this skeleton of an idea. How does it bend? How does it stretch? Does it feel true in different sort of harmonic contexts or emotional contexts?
Yeah, when you kind of recontextualize it in different emotions, does it still work?
Exactly. Yeah. That's 100% correct. So it's largely a mixture of just playing and thinking about it. And also, silly as it sounds, singing it. Do you know what I mean? Like if you can sing something and it feels memorable.
No, definitely.
And I'm not a great singer, but feels kind of I don't know, feels like somehow true to what you're seeing and hearing. So that's kind of
Yeah.
That was the process for that a lot of the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And actually, majority of the it's slightly, well, I don't know, it's embarrassing, but I realized that I was going to do a bit of traveling around with the film and the writing, so I wanted to make sure that I had a keyboard that I could take anywhere, and I would always have the same thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so a majority of the score was written on this.
Awesome.
Which is it's an Arturia keystep controller.
That's awesome.
Not
and
full
simple.
size keys, nice and simple, but also consistent. So no matter if I was here or I was at a different place, if I was in the South Island, if I was in London, or if I was in Tokyo, I had this. I mean, I could just throw that in my backpack.
This is the little guy that I use for a lot of stuff.
Oh, Akai, nice, man. Solid. I mean, I do have larger controllers that sort of feel more like a piano. But putting that in my backpack is a little tricky.
I've been playing around with, because I am mainly a bassist and a guitarist.
Nice.
So I can't articulate as well and as quickly on a piano as I can on those instruments.
Yeah.
So I actually recently got a jam stick. I don't know if you've ever seen or heard those.
I have not. What is a jam stick? Hey, let me look this up.
The jam stick has a MIDI pickup on the guitar. And it actually tracks pretty well.
Oh my gosh.
So I can just run my Spitfire libraries on my jam stick. So
that's so cool. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
It's a lot of fun. And as we were talking about before, that fun element is definitely part of it.
This is, you've switched me onto this. I never knew this thing existed.
Yeah, I have mine right here.
Oh my goodness, that's awesome. Oh, there it is. Wow.
So it's got USB-C here.
Wow. So you're articulating. Wow.
So I just plug it in just like any other MIDI controller, and
that's so cool.
It struggles a little tiny bit with latency if you've got a lot of stuff going on. But really, I mean, the trade-off of being able to write on an instrument that I'm way more familiar with.
Yeah, that's incredible. Oh, Jordan, thank you. I'm going to go and check that out.
They're really, really awesome.
I love this idea, because the way that you play is like the guitar, in terms of like the way that you articulate a note on the guitar versus the keyboard. It's a very different
just puts your brain in a
process,
different kind of format. So I've been playing a lot with this kind of idea because a lot of the time the issue that I run into, and I don't even know if I would call it an issue, but a hurdle maybe, is that a lot of the time, whether it be in Pro Tools working with MIDI or on a piano or even on the guitar sometimes, you can end up playing shapes. And you kind of come to this point where you're like, wait a second, I'm playing recognizable shapes and not like writing something. I'm not writing an idea. So that's why I've been playing around with different ways of different instruments.
Can you tune, like with the jam stick, can you retune it like you could a guitar and sort of like, say drop D or
it does have different tunings that you can use. I haven't tried it too much, but it has a set of them that you can play with. So you imagine like putting it in an open tuning and writing a harp part or something like that, It's
amazing.
A lot easier than on piano, I would say.
100%. Oh my goodness.
So that's part of my adventure right now. I have a fellow prof at the college here that has one of the, I can't remember the brand right now, but it's a MIDI saxophone basically.
Oh yeah, okay, right, yeah.
And that was the first instrument that I ever played. And I've been considering that as well as another way of like shifting out of familiar territory,
I
into a
love
different,
this.
just as long
Yeah,
as I can write
100%.
MIDI still.
Yeah. That's the thing. But sort of like different ways of interfacing and articulating instruments or electronic software,
Yeah.
different controllers. I love that. I
Yeah.
love
I'm
this
no
idea.
singer. I'm no singer, but I've been also looking at ways of getting like a auto tune plug in so that I can sing
Yeah,
in to the
yeah, yeah,
computer
yeah,
and then
yeah.
just transfer it to MIDI as well.
Oh, I love
Um,
that idea.
yeah, just
I
different
love this
ideas
idea.
to to get that out.
This is amazing. This is great. Oh, this is
I,
amazing. Oh, I love this. Nice.
yeah,
Thank you
I
very
thought it
much.
was a lot.
I'm looking up the Jamstick, and I will have to explore this. Thank you.
Definitely.
That is.
I A quick side story here.
Yeah.
I've been to. I don't know if you know who Victor Wooten is, the bassist.
Victor Wooten
Um,
sounds familiar.
yeah, he's an amazing bassist who has done a lot of solo stuff and played with the Bela Fleck and the Flecktones, Grammy-winning kind of stuff. And
Did he play in that band with Stanley Clark?
yeah,
Is that all right?
SMV
MV
played with
SMV. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah,
Stanley,
gotcha.
Marcus Miller, and
All
Victor.
right. Wow. Okay.
Right.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, so he has a camp in Nashville that I've been to a bunch of times. And
Wow.
amazing experience. Every musician's
Yeah.
got to do it. But
Wow. That sounds incredible.
yeah, people from over the world get together and have classes with Victor and with Chuck Rainey, the bassist
Wow.
for Steely Dan, and all this kind of stuff. Amazing. um,
That's incredible.
and one of the times I was there, the guy who actually made my bass, his company's name is Ripsky, and
Okay.
he made these. He was working with someone who makes. I don't know if they still do it, but they
Yeah.
used to make these basses called fret tracks basses, and
Fresh tracks.
every single fret was wired with MIDI. So it was almost too fast, if you can think about that, because as
Yeah,
soon
I'm
as you
trying to
touch
think
the
about
fret
that.
down, it's triggering MIDI. And so I've watched Victor perform with this bass where it's all MIDI, so you can imagine the possibilities, right? Where
Yeah.
he's tapping and it's a synth, but his left hand is playing the bass part, all this crazy stuff. Um, so
Oh my
that's the
God.
best version of this MIDI instrument that I've ever seen because
Wow.
it's individually fret wired, right? So the latency is essentially non-existent because it's not converting anything, right? It's contact based.
That's incredible. That sounds like, I
Anyways,
mean, amazing, but also like to gain mastery over that
you
and
have to
latent
play very
possibilities.
well and very
Yeah.
cleanly. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah, cleanly, like your precision has to be.
yeah. You'd wonder how much time you spend in Pro Tools, like cleaning up uh, hit notes, you know?
If it was me, a lot of time I could tell you that. But I
Yeah,
love that idea. No, I'm
yeah,
fascinated in the idea of I guess what loosely is called alternate controllers, but controllers that are basically not on off like so much of the keyboard instruments that we interface with
yeah,
are.
yeah.
And so finding something that allows you a modicum of expression, just an articulation, is
Instead of
really
having
really
to
appealing. Yeah.
write it in later and
Boink. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
been playing around with. A long time ago, I had one of the small C boards that you can actually
Oh, the rolly
dig
ones. Yeah,
into it.
those are
Yeah,
fun. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. Especially when you have it set up properly with like a Spitfire instrument,
Yes.
it can be really really nice.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I've just
Just
invested in a breath controller actually, which I have to say has been a good time. Took
that's
a little
really
while to
cool.
get used to it, but it is a very very cool.
Yeah, that's the thing. Eh? You gotta get used to the new toys, but then they're
That's
awesome.
it. But then they're like, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very awesome. Well,
So,
we talked a little bit about the process of kind of writing a little bit.
yeah.
Now, I did want to talk really quickly about, well, quickly, we'll see. Um, when it comes to, like, you've written a theme,
hmm
but it now has to be orchestrated
hmm
for the orchestra to play.
hmm
how does that process work? And, you know,
Sure.
is there a kind of built-in way to do that, or are you deciding, or, is there kind of rules, I guess you could say, that you follow for that kind of thing? This is how we break it out into, because you're essentially starting
Oh,
with
right.
a melody and a chord progression kind of thing. And then how is that expanded out?
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, that's okay. These are again great questions. So it's expanded out in the sense that, so yeah, if you're talking about sort of writing theme and harmony and variations,
Mhm.
yeah. So that's the basic, idea. But then I sort of mock up the orchestral parts in my DAW. So I'm playing in everything for every instrument. Um, and so all of the complete sort of score is is in the DAW. For for the Rohirrim, we didn't have the budget, or well, we didn't have the resources, let's just say, to record like 100 musicians in a big room like the original trilogy. We were a little more economic about, well, we didn't have the resources, so we had to kind of think carefully about how we were going to build our orchestral sound
Right.
world. So for us, that meant having like a number of string players and overdubbing them, and so basically just to get sort of width and kind of depth. So all of the orchestral parts are essentially written. I wrote them into the DAW because trying to sort of imbue the mock-up that's come out of my Pro Tools session with a little bit more of imperfection or a little more chaos. I would probably stack a bunch of strings into the mock-up that were, not needed for the
Mm.
actual recording itself, because
Right.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So basically, once I've done that, then for Rohirrim, we had this incredible orchestrator and conductor, Hamish McKeach, Hamish is the artistic director of the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra. He's a fantastic musician, incredible conductor. And we were working with an ensemble called Stroma Filmworks. So Stroma is a subset. Well, most of the players in Stroma, if not all of them, do play with the symphony orchestra, but
Mm.
it's an ensemble set up to play largely sort of chamber music for at this kind of end of the of the 20th century, beginning
Mm.
of the 21st century. So generally more modern things that you don't usually see on like the NZSO program, like Xenakis or Sayaho or
Mm.
those kind of composers. That's some stuff that I kind of listen to and gravitate towards. And I go to all of the Stroma concerts, see these musicians playing together. They're flexible, they're amazing, and they were a perfect fit for our score. Hamish knows the players, right? So I'm presenting the music to him, and he's basically translating the MIDI into the score that the players are going to get. Because he
Right.
knows the players, there are instances, he can see that there's stuff in my session that's superfluous to his needs. It was just for the demo.
Mm.
He's taking the stuff he's putting, the transposition instruments, making everything really basically clear and easy for the players to understand, so that it gets put down in front of them and they're like, we have no questions, it's clear. But the other thing about that he knows the players is that, for example, with the winds or any section of the orchestra, he could say, for example, well, conventional wisdom has it that this instrument can only reach this top note or this low note.
Yeah.
But in fact, I know this player can do this or this or this, so keep that in mind.
Mm. Interesting.
Yeah, and I'm basically he's helping to translate what's in the computer and the music, the intent of it, into information score sheets that the players can read and understand clearly and quickly.
Yeah.
Um,
Because Pro Tools does not do the best job at the score editor is a little.
It's definitely
difficult to use.
improved. It's definitely
Yeah.
improved, but there's room for improvement. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the MIDI side of things in Pro Tools has improved so much, and it's my DAW of choice.
Yeah.
It does a lot of things really, really brilliantly.
Yeah.
It does
But
some
what
things. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was.
No, that's
I was going to say that when you open up the score editor in Pro Tools, that's not necessarily something that you can give to a musician and be like,
No.
it's ready for you.
I generally, I have to go through. I have to generally, if I'm doing it myself, I go through Sibelius, because Sibelius and Pro Tools are sort of part of the same ecosystem, and
Right.
for me that works really well. And Sibelius allows a lot more kind of detailing, and and I've been using Avid and Sibelius for a long time, so I've I guess a reasonable fluency in how I need it to work for what I need it to do. But having Hamish, the somebody who inherently knows the players, someone who's an incredible musician, incredible conductor, having that sort of level of talent on that you're collaborating with was an incredible privilege for me. I learned a lot from Hamish, and would also be sort of to sort of sit down and him going, well, this is your intent here, but you could achieve this by dropping, say, the clarinet an octave down. It'll give you this kind of tonality, and the sample is not quite indicative of what that sounds like. The difference between the sample and the real player. Those kind of things were just hugely valuable. And he's absolutely, he's wonderful to work with. So having someone who can help you realize what you're trying to do in a better way than you ever thought you could. If that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And then they go and record, right?
And then we go and record, which was we recorded most of the score in New Zealand in a very small chapel on a hill looking over the harbour in Seatoon, and it's a beautiful sounding room. It's quite bright, but it has a really nice character that we liked, and we did everything separately. So like strings, overdub strings, winds. We recorded section by section. We recorded the brass in the UK because we couldn't work it out. We couldn't get a time that suited the brass players here. So brass, Japanese percussion, timpani, crumb horns, shawms, Welsh fife. In London, hardanger, which is the Nordic fiddle, or the resonating fiddle that we sort of hear in Howard Shore's Rohan music. That
Right.
was done in Mexico. And all the rest of the material was done in New Zealand.
A lot of pieces.
A lot of pieces, and our amazing producer and score mixer Mark Wilshire did such an amazing job making that sort of sound like a cohesive entity. And
They were in the same room.
Yeah, like they were. And he's from Ottawa. That's his hometown,
really?
actually. So
That's awesome. Wow. Probably just down the road.
Hey, probably.
Yeah.
He's and that was kind of the advantage of having the flexibility of recording everything in different layers and different sessions was huge. However, what it meant was if there were any changes at any point, we'd have to echo those through all of the other
All
sessions.
iterations,
All iterations, and luckily we had a team that were very fastidious about that sort of stuff. So
yeah. Wow, a lot of moving pieces, but that is really awesome, and the end product was amazing, I will say.
Oh, thank you, Jordan. Yeah. Thank you very much indeed. It was a huge privilege to do it. So I love working with those people.
I know that, especially my audience, that a lot of music enthusiasts in my world, obviously.
Awesome.
So they've been.
Well, hello to all of them.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes, thank you.
I know they're really excited to see this, and hopeful that you'll be back in Middle Earth to do more in the future. We'll see.
Yeah, I hope so too. I had such a great time, and just such lovely people, to work with, which I think is alongside fun, is a very important thing. Fun and good people. Let's see how things go. I mean, any time, would love to work back from them.
Definitely.
Look, Jordan, it's super nice to meet you, and thank you so much for having me on your show. And I think your work is great, and I really hope that there is a way that we can find a connection to maybe HarperCollins or someone who can listen to your work and go, oh, this is amazing, and it should be ingrained in what we do and deployed into the ears of many millions of people.
Well, I can only hope, but thank you so much for that. Hopefully we'll hear your work more.
Oh, thank you so much, and likewise.